I decided to tell Dexter about what I had just seen there around 15 minutes earlier. He slowly looked around at me like I was crazy, then said, "Owls aren't that big, Dad." A few days later, I shared my enormous owl experience with Derek, a friend of mine who is also fascinated by strange and unusual occurrences. Derek listened carefully to my story, then looked at me for just a little bit too long before saying, "Owls aren't that big, Mark." I could sense a pattern emerging. This podcast was researched, produced and presented by me, Mark Anthony Wyatt, for Leviathan Media Productions. Copyright Mark Anthony Wyatt 2023.
And this is what I played for him.
She's a pretty bird, she warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Hello and welcome to episode 25 of the Cuckoo Town podcast. Owls aren't that big, Dad. The event that changed my life occurred back in the autumn of 2013, in the early hours of the morning at an ancient crossroads about a mile from the historic town of Stratton in North Cornwall, very close to two significant locations. The first being Stamford Hill, the site of a 1643 English Civil War battle, and the second, the GCHQ top-secret facility run by the security agencies of the British and American governments, located on the nearby cliffs of Moor Enstow. Now, crossroads have long been acknowledged as special places where practitioners of magic could enhance natural powers to aid their spell work. They're also said to hold some diabolical significance too, as in the story of a blues musician, Robert Johnson, who is alleged to have sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads in return for his great talent on guitar. Historically, criminals were hung at crossroads, and those who had committed suicide were buried there, due to a commonly held superstition that the ghosts of these people would be confused by the different routes available at the crossroads, and therefore not be able to find their way back to their village to haunt anyone. Interestingly, as I would find out later via local Cornish witnesses who relayed to me their own weird experiences, that the crossroads where I had my strange experience was in the middle of an area of ongoing high strangeness, a paranormal crosshairs of sorts. To give you a couple of examples of the kind of paranormal activity that I soon became aware of in that area, the small country village of Poffil, located just below that crossroads, has many ghostly associations. Witnesses came forward to report seeing English Civil War soldiers hiding in hedgerows, and terrified galloping horses that ran through a brick wall like it wasn't even there. I also heard from a senior employee of the huge GCHQ government base that he and some colleagues had seen a black triangle UFO hovering directly over the high security base. Now, I believe that whatever it was that I encountered in the early hours of the morning at that remote crossroads may have also been taken an interest in that high-tech base, as it was just a short distance away. You may be wondering, what strange event happened that night and what exactly did I encounter? Well, the evening had begun ordinarily enough. I had just dropped Dexter, my eldest son, off at his friend's place on the edge of Stratton Village, just past the battlefield site on the hill. Dexter played bass and guitar, and he'd gone up there to rehearse with his bandmates. As he was removing his bass and amp from the car, he had said to me, "I'll ring you later, Dad, to let you know when to come and pick me up." And I recall asking him to not make it too late. I had to be up early in the morning to go to work. Dexter had responded, "All right, Dad, it won't be too late. I'll ring you at about 10:30. I remember him walking away, laden down with his equipment, towards a partially open garage door, which was emitting the sound of loud power cords and just the faintest whiff of a sweet-smelling illegal substance. There was no proper public transportation in rural areas of Cornwall. I liked to help my kids get to and from their friends' houses, as they often lived in out-of-the-way country areas. At least that way I was able to sleep untroubled by worries of their safety, walking home alone on dark, remote country lanes in the small hours. The Bude area where we lived is bordered by the sea to the north, and mostly agricultural land and small country villages inland for many miles around. background. Bude is about 50 minutes from Barnstaple, the nearest town, to its north, and 90 minutes from Exeter, the nearest city, to the south. The country roads that connect Bude to the outlying areas are generally much darker than their urban counterparts. There is very little street lighting in the Cornish countryside. To back that claim up, I will quote a study by a London university. They found that the North Cornwall area, where Bude is located, was amongst the darkest in the whole of the UK. Later that night, back at home in Flexbury, a district of Bude that is very close to the sea. I was sat alone in our front room, half watching the TV and half reading a book about Horatio Nelson. At around 10:30, as expected, Dexter rang. I picked up my mobile phone. He said, "All right, Dad, come and get me, please." I replied, "Yes, no worries, Dex, I'll be up there in about 10 minutes. After ending the call, I put my phone on the coffee table alongside me. Just to be clear, the phone was not on silent mode. I wouldn't have even known how to do that. From my perspective, my phone then immediately rang again. It felt to me like I had only just put the phone down a split second earlier. It was Dexter again. He sounded very annoyed. "Where the hell have you been, Dad?" His crosswords took me by surprise and, to be honest, angered me. I said something like, "Bloody hell, Dex, give me a chance. I've only just put the phone down from your call." There was a short pause at his end, then he said, "Dad, that was 2.5 hours ago." I checked my watch. He was right. It was now just before 1 o'clock in the morning. I had seemingly just lost 2.5 hours. Confused, my mind in turmoil, I apologised to Dexter, telling him that I would be up to get him as soon as possible. I remember feeling awful that I had made him wait so long, and thinking how awkward it must have been for him to sit outside his mate's place for so long waiting for me to arrive. Grabbing my car keys from the drawer unit in our hallway, I opened the front door, then walked briskly out into the street. Victoria Road was slumbering under the light of a waxing moon. In the near distance, I could hear the sound of waves crashing around the rocks under Mare Cliff. If I had been still drowsy after being so abruptly awakened from a deep sleep, the chilly night air would have immediately roused me. Hurriedly walking down the road in the direction of Crooklet's Beach, I rounded the corner into Summerlees Avenue, to where my Suzuki Jitara Jeep was parked, right outside my friend Dick's bicycle shop. I drove my car that night like a Finnish rally driver going through a Swedish forest. My exhaust had recently blown, so I probably woke up everyone in the neighbourhood too. Living in the North Cornish countryside at that time, we were rather spoilt, as there were so few policemen working in the area to pull us over for speeding or other offences. I know it's hard to picture the scene if you've not driven on any of our smaller British country roads, but I was driving on roads that were only a few feet wider than my car. If you are native to Britain, as I am, this is perfectly normal and safe. It's no big deal, but I know from experience that some foreigners struggle with it. As I approached the quiet, rural crossroads that would alter my life's course, I slowed right down, in the unlikely event that there might be another vehicle in the vicinity within a few miles. A right turn was required, but naturally, being as I was in Britain, I had to look left first. It was, as expected, clear. Then I looked over to my right, and that's when I saw it. Standing in the middle of the road was an owl, but this was no ordinary owl. This owl stood taller than my car's 3.5-foot high bonnet. It's a hood if you're an American. I would estimate the owl's body to have been somewhere around 2.5 feet across at its widest point. Its dimensions resembled an obese little man. Weirdly, as is common with many other paranormal experiences, the abnormality of the owl's unnatural scale didn't strike me until after the event happened. It's odd how that is so often the case. I decided to wait a moment to see if a massive owl would just fly away, allowing me to make the necessary right turn to get on with my journey. The owl was staring me down with its mesmerising dark eyes, but weirdly, I got the feeling that it wasn't an owl at all, but some weird dwarf-like tubby man masquerading as an owl. He gave the impression of being a pompous policeman, deciding what he was going to do with me. I had a strong intuition that I had disturbed some strange activity, but he may have been concealing something not meant for human eyes. Enhanced by the moonlight, there seemed to be a kind of light blurry haze all around him. but a few feet to his rear I could see the murky outline of a field hedge. I pushed the button on my car's door to lower the side window, and remember that in Britain the driver always sits on the right side of the car. I remember shouting at the gigantic owl, "Hey you, get out of the bloody road!" I felt a bit daft talking to an owl, as if it would understand my English and good old-fashioned Anglo-Saxon swear words too. I decided to drive very slowly towards the massive creature, thinking that if I gently pushed it out of the way with my bumper, it might be less arrogant and fly away. But as I got closer to it, it just continued to stare me down, like a bully in a school playground. When the bumper was about 2 feet from touching the owl's body, it just suddenly took off, flying towards me. As it passed by, close enough for me to touch its outspread right wing, it gave me one last contemptuous stare with its mesmerizing dark eyes. The resultant downdraft from its enormous flapping wings was so powerful that it rocked my car from side to side. I continued on towards the house where I had dropped Dexter off much earlier that night, a bit shaken up by this odd encounter. When I arrived, there was Dexter, sat on his hamp, looking a bit disgruntled, his base leaning at a low angle against a little stone wall, a rollie poised in his right hand. Sulkily he got up, stubbed his rollie out on the wall, then started to load his equipment into the back of the Jeep. Having done that, he got into the front passenger seat. I apologised again for the delay, told him that I must have fallen asleep in the armchair, but by then I already strongly suspected that the real reason for my delay may not have been quite so straightforward. Something else may have happened, but what? As we drove away, turning left to go back past the battlefield site, now on my right side of course, leading up towards the crossroads again, I asked Dexter how his rehearsal had gone. He seemed happy enough and told me that they had a gig at the Carrier's pub in Bude on Saturday night. As I approached the crossroads, I cautiously studied the area ahead of us to see if a huge owl may have returned. Fortunately, there was no sign of it. I decided to tell Dexter about what I had just seen there, around 15 minutes earlier. He slowly looked around at me like I was crazy, then said, "Owls aren't that big, Dad." A few days later, I shared my enormous owl experience with Derek, a friend of mine who is also fascinated by strange and unusual occurrences. Derek listened carefully to my story, then looked at me for just a little bit too long before saying, "Owls aren't that big, Mark." I could sense a pattern emerging. Quickly looking through his bookcase, he found a copy of the Observer Book of British Birds, and we went through it together, looking for something that resembled what I'd seen. We also looked into various migrant birds, as sometimes birds are blown off course into areas where they are not native. Other than the more normal-sized owls, I couldn't see any birds that resembled the colossal owl that I had witnessed that night. In further research, we found that some people had reported seeing undocumented owl species in Britain, and apparently some of these were called big hoots, which was precisely the reaction I received in the coming weeks and months when I relayed my strange experience to more people. Some of them thought it hilarious. Okay, so this is where we leave the ornithology behind us and we return for a second helping of high strangeness. A few years later, while staying in Illinois, I was revisiting some rough notes that I'd made in the aftermath of my weird owl experience, as I wanted to accurately recall any further details with a view to including the experience in my next book, The Spirit of Cornwall, A Haunted Legacy. I'd been writing at my host's kitchen table for several hours straight, intensely focused, and I was now mentally exhausted. I needed a break. Grabbing a beer from the fridge, I went over to the sofa, picked up the remote control and put YouTube onto the TV, trawling through innumerable videos that came up automatically on my host's TV, mostly about gardening, camper vans and tiny houses, her obsessions at the time. My eyes were suddenly drawn, though, towards a paranormal-themed video thumbnail that was incongruously included with those others. This unexpected video thumbnail pulled me in like metal filings to a magnet. It showed the archetypal alien. You know the one? Yes, that one. The one with the big almond-shaped eyes alongside an owl. The eyes on both creatures seemed to be communicating directly with me. The synchronicity of finding that particular video at just that moment, given that I had literally just closed my laptop, thinking that I had completed my chapter on my strange owl experience, was astounding. What were the odds? I felt compelled to watch that video. I could not resist it. It was a video podcast called Expanded Perspectives, produced and hosted by two Texas lads, Cam and Kyle. After some initial mundane chat, the narrative soon turned to a strange connection between owls and aliens. They now had my full attention. One of the hosts was relating a story that they had received from one of their listeners in Texas. Here's his story. I was alone in my car, driving down a dark country road at night. I spotted a giant owl. It was about 5 feet high and was stood at the side of the road in front of me. I slowed right down, unwound my window and had a good look at it. It didn't fly away. I got a very weird vibe from that owl. It was as if the owl was angry with me and wanted me to leave. I drove off feeling confused and scared. This witness knew there was something very odd about his large owl sighting. It just hadn't felt right, so he had later decided to visit a hypnotist. He was hoping to recover any possible repressed memories. In his altered state, the witness was asked by the hypnotist to fully describe the owl that he had seen, beginning at its head and then working downwards. Eventually, there had been a long pause, and the hypnotist had asked him what he was looking at now. There was another long pause, before the witness nervously responded, "The owl is wearing red boots." Hearing this account, I was flabbergasted. The Texas witness and I were on separate continents when we had our experiences, and yet the details, including the description of the countryside, were astoundingly similar, with the exception of the red boots, of course. The researcher and writer Mike Leland has been studying people's weird large owl experiences, synchronicities, and the nature of consciousness for almost 10 years now. His initial interest was sparked by his own odd owl encounters. When I had my strange experience at the Crossroads in 2013, I knew nothing about Mike Leland or the suggested connection between owls and aliens. It was only after my strange experience, when I began to look online to see if anyone else had experienced something similar, that I began to see Mike Leland's name regularly cropping up. His first book on the subject, back in 2015, around 2 years after my experience, The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicity and the UFO Abductee, was a deep study of the phenomenon. The popular theory in ufology is that some unknown intelligences may be communicating with us telepathically, using screen images to mask their true appearances. As an example of this, I recall Mike Leland discussing a case where someone had been confronted by a huge owl. This particular witness had heard the mantra, "Owl, owl, 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 owl," repeated over and over and over again in his head as he was observing the huge owl. Now, was that the witness's brain trying to make sense of what he was looking at? Or was it, as I suggested earlier, the thing that he was looking at sending him that suggestion telepathically? Another important aspect of Mike Leland's research has been the missing time element of people's large owl encounters. Witnesses have often reported losing time after encountering these huge owls, which of course also ties into the older fairy lore, where missing time also plays an important part in some of the stories. You will have noted my emphasis on the word after. This is because I feel that my experience was slightly different to all the other cases that I've heard about. I appeared to lose time before meeting the huge owl at the Crossroads. I'm confident I didn't just fall asleep, as my son rang me several times throughout that missing time period, desperately trying to get hold of me, and I'm sure that any one of those calls would have woken me up had I have been asleep. The fact that my missing time occurred before the event and not during the event, which is so at odds with every other witness account I've ever read, is the biggest puzzle to me. I still can't get my head around it, as it makes no sense. Research suggests there is often a transformative portent element to these huge owl sightings. I had no idea at the time that it happened, but in retrospect I now believe it was a transformative moment for me too. My life has changed beyond measure since that strange night in 2013. From living a quiet, unassuming life as a self-employed landscape gardener in rural Cornwall, the world suddenly seemed to open up for me in unimaginable ways. Looking back now, I believe that the owl encounter was the spark that ignited my latent ambitions. Within a few months of the encounter, I had begun to take my writing more seriously, and I was well on my way to becoming a published author. My first book, Wyatt's Weird World, published in 2016, opened up so many doors for me. It led to guest appearances on various radio and podcast shows in the UK, Canada, and in the USA. The amazing new people that I've met along the way have enriched my life. It allowed me access to new opportunities. Perhaps my experience that night was a cosmic nudge onto a divergent timeline, one that is now more creatively aligned to the passions in my life. Before we end this episode, I just want to say a big thank you to my son Dexter, as I used an extract from an old song of his, It's a Dark, Dark Night, which he used to perform around 10 years ago with his old bandmates Morgan Davis and Alfie Belifo in Bude in Cornwall. I was a very proud dad and a superb musician, a great bass line, very memorable. Well done, Dex, and thank you. You've been listening to the Cuckoo Town podcast, and I've been your host, Mark Anthony Wyatt. It's a Leviathan Media production. Copyright Mark Anthony Wyatt 2023. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please spread the word by telling all your friends about us, and remember to like, subscribe and share the podcast too. We're on all the major podcast platforms that you know, and probably a fair few that you've never even heard of. Plus, we're on YouTube too. We hope to see you next time then, when we'll take another stroll together down a road less travelled. Oh, just one more thing. I nearly forgot. Be lucky. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Jack of diamonds, you're the meanest heart I know. Well, you up my poor pockets, my silver and gold. I'm going up on a mountain, gonna build me a whiskey still, and I'll sell you one bottle for a $20 bill. Going up on a mountain, gonna stand there looking down, so I can see my pretty baby whenever she comes around. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, and she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July.
Why pick on Hud, Granddad? He ain't the only one. Just about everybody around here is like him one way or another.
Well, that's no cause for rejoicing, is it? Lonnie, little by little, the look of the country changes because of the men we admire.
Da da da.